Hello everyone, this is Rabbitearsblog, and welcome to my new TV show review series. Today's TV review is on Wolverine the X-Men. No, not the comic book Wolverine the X-Men, but the animated TV series that came out in 2008 and ended its run in 2009. Wolverine the X-Men basically starts off with a mysterious explosion occurs at the mansion, and Jean Grey and Professor Xavier turn up missing. A year later, the X-Men split up and go their separate ways, including Wolverine, who realizes that Mutant Response Division, MRD, are hunting not only the mutants, but any human being who helps them. When Wolverine wanted to find Professor Xavier to fix this, he tries to get all the X-Men back together again to search for him. Unfortunately, when the X-Men finally found Professor Xavier, they realized that he was put into a coma that will last for 20 years. But even though Professor Xavier is in a coma, he was able to contact Wolverine psychically through 20 years in the future, and he warns Wolverine that the future is being ruled by the Sentinels, and that mutant kind is in danger. To stop the Sentinels from overtaking the city in the future, Professor Xavier tells Wolverine that he must lead the X-Men while stopping any threat in the present that could affect the future. Confused? Don't worry, it will become clear once you watch this show. Now, when I had first heard about the show, several thoughts were going through my head, such as, how could Wolverine lead the X-Men, and what, another dystopian future storyline? First, I wanted to point out the positive aspects of the show. I was really impressed with the storyline about Professor Xavier being able to contact Wolverine 20 years in the past to warn him about the dystopian future that is about to come, since it's not often that I see Professor Xavier being able to use his telepathic powers in that way. It really provided a unique storyline about how Wolverine has to stop whatever terrible event is about to happen in the present in order to prevent the future from becoming a war zone. I also enjoy the way that this show tried to get in many different storylines that occur in the comics, such as the Dark Phoenix Saga, Days of Future Past, a couple of stories from the Ultimate X-Men comics, and Age of Apocalypse, and managed to connect each story to each other to create one exciting plot that really carried the season. Another thing I loved about the show was the animation, as the animation was truly fluid, and I loved the way that the fight scenes were portrayed whenever the characters were using martial arts moves to take down their enemies, and you could see the swiftness of their moves as they are kicking the enemies. I also love the fact that this show actually introduced X-Men characters that we wouldn't normally see in any other television or movie incarnation of the X-Men, and it was interesting that some of the characters for the new X-Men, Dust, Hellion, Pixie, actually made appearances in the show. What was interesting about this is that Craig Kyle and Christopher Yost, who worked on the show, also worked on the new X-Men comics, and they were able to bring in characters from the new X-Men comics brilliantly in this show. I also like some of the character portrayals in the show, mainly Nightcrawler and Angel. I love seeing Nightcrawler as his old swashbuckling self that he was usually portrayed in the comics, and probably some of my favorite episodes from this show actually revolve around Nightcrawler, especially the episodes dealing with the Mojoverse. I was also interested in the Angel storyline in this series, since it's rare that we ever see Angel get any kind of big arc in any X-Men cartoon, with the possible exception of X-Men Evolution. I don't want to spoil things for you in case you haven't seen the show yet, but what happened to Angel during the series was both tragic and interesting at the same time, and it really sets up what the next season would be about if he plays a huge role in the next season. The way that the show started off, began with a mysterious explosion at the mansion, was very well done, as the remainder of the season was spent on discovering who caused the explosion at the mansion and what kind of effect it would have on the X-Men. And I love the way that there are clues set up in some episodes that led to how the explosion in the mansion was caused. Even though the storylines and the animation were done brilliantly, the show did have its flaws. For one thing, I felt that this show focused too much time on Wolverine and not enough time on the other X-Men characters. Sure, this show is called Wolverine and the X-Men, but it felt like the other X-Men characters, which included Iceman, Shadowcat, Storm, Beast, Forge, Angel, and Nightcrawler, were just there to provide backup for Wolverine and do nothing else. There weren't a lot of storylines going on for the other X-Men characters, and they didn't have much screen time as well, and I was very disappointed about that since I wanted to learn more about the other X-Men characters. The only other X-Men characters that got some focus was Nightcrawler, Angel, Emma Frost, and Cyclops. And I have explained before about how much I enjoyed the storylines done with Nightcrawler and Angel. Now, Cyclops was a bit of a mixed bag for me, since I was interested in one episode that featured him fight off Mr. Sinister, but at the same time his broody nature in the entire show sort of annoyed me a bit. I know that Cyclops is upset about not fighting Jean Grey, but I wanted to see Cyclops actually be more responsible in this series, and be the leader that he was shown in the comics. Of course, if they had done that, then the show wouldn't be called Wolverine the X-Men, and Wolverine would never be the leader of the X-Men. Another character that was sort of treated poorly in this series was Storm, as she seems more like a background character who does nothing but shoot lightning bolts whenever she is needed. I wanted to see the strong and independent character shown in the comics, as she was once the leader of the X-Men and served as second in command in the X-Men. It would have been interesting to see Storm actually assist Wolverine in his duties as the leader of the X-Men, so that way she would have served a purpose in the show. This show also had the problem with having too many filler episodes, mostly coming from storylines that center on Wolverine's Weapon X backstory. The problem with this is that even though I love Wolverine's Weapon X backstory, which is what really defined him as a character, I have heard this storyline so many times both in the comics and in the media that I usually get a little tired of this plotline being used over and over again. If this cartoon was just called Wolverine and focused on Wolverine's past and his journey in becoming a better person, then I wouldn't mind the Weapon X storyline being used. But since the show is about Wolverine trying to stop a catastrophe from happening that could affect the future while trying to find out what the explosion at the mansion was, it just doesn't fit into the storyline, and it takes up too much time in the series. Another episode that I felt didn't really need to be in the show was Wolverine's battle with the Hulk, since it did not play a huge role in this series. Also, this battle felt like a repeat of the Wolverine vs. Hulk video. Although, to be fair, the Wolverine vs. Hulk video did come out after Wolverine the X-Men, so you can say that the Wolverine vs. Hulk video was sort of inspired by this episode. The biggest issue with the show is that there seems to be too many storylines going on in one season. I know I complimented on the fact that this show had many different storylines, but it could get really confusing in a second. We know that the bulk of the series was focused on Wolverine trying to prevent a dystopian future from happening, but then you get storylines that focus on Mr. Sinister, the Inner Circle, the more kid-friendly name of the Hellfire Club, and Wolverine's Weapon X pass. I did find this a bit confusing since I often wondered to myself about how Wolverine's Weapon X pass really ties into what is going on with the plot line. However, I did like the Inner Circle and the Mr. Sinister plotline since they do serve an importance to the plot. You just have to see the show to find out how they are important to the plot. Wolverine the X-Men ran for one season with a total of 26 episodes. Overall, I'm giving Wolverine the X-Men a thumbs up. Even though this show has a lot of flaws, I found the storylines to be really entertaining. And because of so many different storylines being shown at one time, you can easily view this show as many times afterwards. I've enjoyed the show so much that I was definitely looking forward to the second season of this show to see what happens next. Unfortunately, this show got canceled due to financial problems, and it's hard to say if Marvel will ever think about continuing the show again. This was a huge disappointment for me because the show ended on a huge cliffhanger, and I wanted to see what would have happened after the events of the series finale, especially after reading through the plans for the second season, which I will reveal in the spoiler section after this review. It's funny that after the show was canceled, Marvel created a comic book series called Wolverine and the X-Men, except that the concept of that comic book series is a lot different from the premise of the show. It would have been interesting to have a comic book series that would have continued from where the TV series had left off, like how Buffy the Vampire Slayer was able to have a Season 8 and Season 9 comic book that took place after the events of the TV show's 7th season. Spoiler alert, if you haven't seen this TV series and you don't want any spoilers revealed, feel free to skip over this, or if you have seen the TV series and you want to know my thoughts on this section, keep watching. Before I get into the plans for Season 2, I would like to discuss about my feelings on what became of Angel. I have mentioned that I've enjoyed the Angel episode where he confronts his father about being a mutant and then end up being in an accident that injures his wings, which his father decided to let the doctors cut off his wings. However, it was a bit odd to see Angel suddenly become Archangel after Mr. Sinister transformed him, because before this episode, Angel didn't really have much of a presence in the series other than show up occasionally to help out Wolverine. I felt that this concept was a bit rushed, just so that something interesting would be done with Angel and introduce the Archangel concept into a TV series. Now on to what would have happened in Season 2. For one thing, there was going to be new characters being introduced into the cast, such as Colossus, Havoc, Magic, Deadpool, and Jubilee. And Colossus was going to have a reintroductory episode that would cause him to be a regular character in Season 2. The fact that Colossus was going to be a part of the cast in the second season was enough for me to wish that the show would have continued as planned, since Colossus is one of my favorite X-Men characters. This was also stated by the creators of the show that they wanted to use Colossus in the first season, but they didn't have the storylines for him, and they were forced to take him out of the season. Well, that's my TV show review on Wolverine the X-Men, and be sure to stay tuned to my other TV show reviews in the future. I'm Rabbitearsblog, and I'll see you later.